I'm Lyndsay Moffat, and I'm an assistant professor at Lakehead University, and the workshop that I conducted at the conference was on issues of gender and popular culture. We spent some time looking actually at some Archie comics, and the first thing that I did with everybody was to look at one Archie comic in particular and to think about some of the ways that it reinforces gender stereotypes, but then also some of the ways that it actually questions gender stereotypes. And then we sort of broke into smaller groups, and people had their own comic to look at in the small group, and they did some of the same kinds of work on their own. Some of it was really easy in that, we saw things like, Betty and Veronica being obsessed with Archie, and the only thing that they were there for was really to get a boyfriend. But then there were things that were more difficult around looking at the way those texts also question gender inequality. One of the reasons why I wanted to do this workshop in this way was that I feel that it doesn't really help to constantly be telling people that their popular culture is bad or negative or they shouldn't enjoy it. That we also need to be looking at ways that even texts that seem very regressive, like Archie comics, anybody who's got any familiarity with this say, yeah, that seems like a pretty regressive text, can also have some things in it that actually challenge gender stereotypes. And that was one of the things that we saw, and I think that people were quite surprised by in the comics that we looked at. Yeah, it's interesting because I picked up a number of different Archie comics sort of randomly, and there's references to feminism throughout them, which I thought was one of the things that makes for a really good teaching point with the students.
Any reason why you want to look at comics rather than, let's say, advertising, or do comics perhaps offer something unique, or do different genres offer different things?
Perhaps it's because I recognize that this text in particular continues to be really important to kids who are at that preteen age, and they're just beginning to form their ideas about relationships. I've seen a lot of work around advertisements, and it's usually much more geared towards higher adolescents, older adolescents, high school, and the kids that I'm mostly interested in working with are sort of in the elementary and moving into middle school. I also think that if you work with a text like this with secondary students, that they don't feel as if the teacher doesn't like their popular culture. Because if they've already got some distance from that, yeah, they read those when they were 10 or 11, yet they can talk about it, that they warm up to it a little bit faster. It would be a different thing entirely if I was to take a text that really meant a lot to them, because their immediate assumption is often that, oh, now you're going to critique the text that means something to me.
So getting a bit of critical distance by bringing something a bit foreign or a bit dated, but
exactly.
Developing those skills like that.
That they don't feel that intimacy with. Yeah. Really simple questions in terms of, how does this text reinforce gender stereotypes or dominant ideas of gender and sexuality, and how does it question some of these stereotypes or these ideas of gender and sexuality? Well, I guess mostly it would be pay attention to what your students are reading and listening to. That's one of the things is having some sense of that and working from there. And then once again, maybe not choosing the thing that they care about the most, but something that they've got a little bit of distance from. Yeah.
And lastly, so for you, what does media literacy mean?
Good question. For me, it means taking in different texts than we've traditionally thought of as literacy, and recognizing that the ways that we communicate have shifted dramatically, particularly in the last 50 years, and recognizing that if we're not looking at so many different, multiple forms of literacy, that we're actually we're leaving schools behind, and we're not equipping students to be part of the world.